This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I talk with the designer Paul Jarvis, and he shares with us his ideas on choosing your clients, niching down, and how this idea of the hustle isn't what it's cracked up to be. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to have Paul Jarvis. Paul has been called the hardest working creative you'll meet, and as a designer and writer, he spends his time at the intersection of creativity and commerce. He has taught over 10,000 students through online courses, published 4 best-selling books, and worked with top entrepreneurs including Marie Forleo, Danielle, Laporte, and Kris Carr. Oh, and when not doing all of this, he finds time to host 2 podcasts, The Freelancer and Invisible Office Hours. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Paul to the show today. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks for having me on. That intro makes me sound so nice.
Well, you deserve it. So share the listeners, what's going on in your world just now?
Currently, I just got back from about a month of traveling, so I still don't feel like I'm back in like business mode. But before that, this year has just been a whirlwind of teaching courses and launching software products and writing. Like writing and podcasting kind of flows through everything that I do. So regardless of what crazy project I'm working on, I'm always writing a weekly newsletter and putting out a weekly podcast. So
those are the things, they're just the evergreens, the continual things you're doing all the time, that writing and the podcast. When it comes to the courses, do you have a sense of like how many you want to be doing a year, or is it just like as an idea kind of takes you start to form a project around that?
Yeah, I want to be doing less courses right now. I think what I've done is I've spent too much time, and this is like a problem that pretty much every creative has. I have an idea for something new and shiny. I put all my work into that, and then I launch it, and then I move on to something else too quickly before spending as much time as I should on each project. And I've done that in the past where I spent more time on it and it's paid off. And I know this, and still I do too many things. So I'm actually retiring all but 2 courses at the end of this year, just focusing on those and launching I'm launching less things moving forward because I just had to. It's just me. It's just me. I don't have a team or anything like that. So I have a finite amount of mental space and time to be able to do these things.
And where did you first learn your craft as a designer? How did that evolve?
So it started. It sounds so bad. It started when the internet started, basically. So I started making websites when the internet started to allow graphics, like just after the days of like dialing into BBSs when the internet kind of started. I started making websites, and I was in school at the time, and then I went to university, and I ended up getting a job offer because I created a website that ended up doing really well. At the time, it's funny, like at the time, the publicity for this was me being on AM radio talk shows.
Wow.
Which is just
that's retro.
That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen nowadays, but this was in the 90s, so things were different. And then an agency where I lived in Toronto at the time thought, hey, we could sell our clients these new things called websites. This guy, we've heard of him because he made a website. And that was really all it took to get a job at an agency, being a web designer at the time, because you couldn't take web design in school because it was basically a new craft. So I didn't go to school for that. I ended up dropping out of school because I wanted to work more than I wanted to learn things I didn't care about. So yeah, I kind of started that way. And then I worked at an agency for about a year. And then I realized that the way that the agency was treating their clients wasn't the way that I wanted to treat clients. And so I was going to go work at another agency. But the day that I quit, all of the clients that agency had started calling me and were like, hey, where are you going to go next? And we'll just take our work there. And then after a couple of them called, I was like, what if I just work for myself and work with all of these clients instead of bringing them to somebody else who's going to make most of the money? So I didn't even want to work, and I've been working for myself for probably about 18 years now. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I never had a plan to work for myself. That's just kind of the way that it worked out. and it stuck.
And it's obviously worked as well. I mean, you've got this great roster of clients that you've worked with. How, obviously, when initially in your career, I'm imagining you were just kind of taking different work, and if it was interesting to you, and as maybe things developed, you have to be a little bit more selective on deciding which projects you wanted to kind of work on. Where do you so maybe now, or just in the past few years, how have you started thinking about deciding what kind of clients you want to work with and how that relationship should build?
Yeah, and I think that's actually really something that's really important that a lot of people ignore, or they think that, well, it would be helpful if I'm picky in the future, but not yet. And I think that's to their own detriment, because I think the reason why I've done well with what I do, and I'm not even a web designer anymore, but when I was just doing web design, was because I was picky from the beginning. So in the beginning, I worked with pro athletes, and I was doing websites for pro athletes. So it made sense for me to just focus on one specific niche, because I could build my name up in that niche as like the guy who makes websites for pro athletes. And then when I switched niches, I could be the person who does this type of work for this type of person. And that's why in my client roster, I have people like Danielle, Laporte, and Marie Forleo, or Carr, and they all they have different businesses, but they all kind of run in the same circle. So the fact that I've worked with a bunch of these women who have businesses that are kind of the way that they have, it makes it easier to market and promote myself and get more work, because it's really hard to be a web designer for somebody that wants a website. I don't know how to promote myself in that case, because it's too big of a pool.
Yeah.
But then when you start to think about, okay, how can I stand out or become a blip on somebody's radar in just this one little circle? And that's all I've ever cared about is. And that little circle has changed, because that's just kind of what happens. You don't have to pick a niche and stick with that for the rest of your life. That would be utterly boring and probably detrimental. But when you're in this little circle, it's a lot easier to start to stand out, because they maybe are talking about you, or maybe in my case, it said designed by Paul Jarvis on the bottom of the site. So the people who wanted to have businesses like those women would see my name, and then I wouldn't need to sell. They would come to me and be like, I see that you did this website that I like for this person whose business I like. I want to hire you. Tell me how much I have to, tell me what your rate is, and I will pay it, and let's start. Yeah. Kind of thing. And it's so hard. Like, there's no way to do that when you're just focused on everybody, because it's too big a pool. Like, I don't know how to sell to everybody. I know how to sell to one like tiny little audience. And that's always enough. And I look at other freelancers who have done really, really well for themselves, and they've done the same thing. They've picked a little group of people where they can make a difference, where they can become a blip on the radar of those people. And then they start to get more work and more work and more work. And then their reputation grows, and their authority grows, and trust grows. And then it's more a matter of, okay, I can put you into my schedule in 6 months if you pay me up front, as opposed to just like, I'm just going to sit around, wait for somebody to call, hope that somebody hires me. That's way too passive, and it doesn't really work either. So
I imagine by niching down in that way, and just kind of really kind of focusing and being quite selective over the kind of clients you want, I imagine that also changes the dynamic of that relationship. So maybe just talk a little bit about when you're working with a client. I'm imagining obviously they'll have had websites before and other things before, and those initial kind of conversations that you're having, I imagine you're not talking about like CSS code. You're talking about brand or the business. What are those initial conversations like?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it came down to, and the reason why I'm able to, and why other freelancers are able to charge like top rates, is because everything relates back to the client's return on investment. It doesn't even matter if you're a web designer, a writer, developer, anything. If you can relate what you do back to the bottom line of the client's business, then you can charge more. Because if I say to you, if you want a website from me, it costs $10,000, and you're like, whoa, Paul, that's a lot of money. But if I can show you how you can turn that $10,000 investment into like $20,000 of revenue a month, or over time an increase by like 50% in sales, then it becomes more of an investment than an expense.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And I think the way that you get to that point, and I think Freelancer, this is another thing that I think freelancers kind of make a mistake on, is the way that they position themselves is you can either basically be thought of as by a client as an authority, a leader, or as a skilled technician. And where a lot of freelancers go wrong is they pitch their technical skills. And that just becomes, then they just become a technician where the client says, I want you to do this for me. Instead of, here's the problem that I have with my business. How can you help me solve this? Or how can we work together to solve this? And in that case, when you're thought of as like a leader or an authority, then the client just tells you what the problem is, and it's up to you to pitch the solution. And those solutions inevitably cost a whole lot more than just, hey, can you design my website and put a button here and a navigation here and a logo here and move this graphic 1 pixel over, or here's how I want you to write the copy, or that sort of thing. And when you're kind of in that position, you typically get paid hourly, which is another thing I don't really like. And it's just hard to you're basically just at the whim of a client, as opposed to if you position yourself as a person who will take the time to understand the business and help that person generate some return on the investment that they're giving to you, then it becomes a lot more easier to stop just doing like prescriptive feedback, like do this, do this, do this. It's more a matter of, okay, this doesn't work. Tell me how I should fix this. And then obviously, like I said, you can charge a lot more money, and the projects are also more enjoyable, I think, too.
And that's probably a conversation that most other freelancers, or the clients not having with most other freelancers. The freelancers aren't coming at it from that either creative perspective or the saying this will deliver this end result, this ROI, and kind of pulling it back to the ROI as well. So you're talking about obviously more as an investment rather than just being a cost as well. And when you sat in those initial discussion, I suppose what must be interesting for you being involved at quite an early stage in the web design and kind of doing the kind of work you do now, and especially in this kind of world of maybe, I don't know the best way to describe it, but people that are very good in the online marketing world, let's say generally. What's been fascinating for me as an outsider, not as a designer, watching, is just the quality, from the look, from the design, just going way up. Especially, I would say, in the past 2 years, it just feels like we're in a different level now. So you must,
and it's like a lot of businesses are now putting more focus. Oh yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of businesses are putting a lot more weight on design. It's not something, because I've worked with startups since the 90s. So like I've seen so many different iterations of how people who run a company value design, not even as a profession, but as a tool for their business to make money. And in the beginning, I wasn't involved in any, as like a creative director on contract of like a startup. And I did that for several years. I was kind of consulted at the end when the developers had done their job, when the sales and marketing team had done their job, when everything else was done, they just needed to make something look nice. That's when design is typically involved. Whereas if you fast forward to now and you look at companies that are so design focused, like the Pinterest or the Airbnbs, and there's kind of been this paradigm shift where people now in ownership positions of companies see the value of design not just as an aesthetic, but as a tool for business, as a tool for building brand and trust and reliability and just like an ease of use across an entire platform. Then it becomes like design is now thought of in every single aspect. It isn't just like, okay, we're at the very end. We just got to design the interface for this thing. Here's a week, get it done. Everything else is done. Just add in this copy and then it's good to go. It's more of a matter now of, okay, well, what can we do? How can we start to think about design when we're thinking about building this thing from scratch? And that I think is really great. And it's also really valuable for people who are just starting out, especially with design. People who are just starting out as designers, there's no better time because businesses are now starting to see the value of design in the beginning and see that it's more than just aesthetics. It's a lot more.
And with your role as a designer is, people are coming to you because you have this ability to not just make things that you talk about the aesthetic, but also like bake the bake the brand in, bake the emotion into what you're creating as well. So where do you go to get inspiration, to get new ideas for your creative work?
Yeah, typically off the internet, because I feel like if I got my inspiration from the place that I work, it would become really derivative really quickly. So I think that for me especially, like architecture, like I know zero about architecture as like a profession, but I know enough to know what I like and to see cues, even like print magazines. I think print has kind of fallen by the wayside in terms of like the top designers don't do print. They do like web and interface stuff, which I think is a bit of, I think that's kind of a little sad, but I think there's so much inspiration from really good print, like fashion magazines, even from old print. Like I was looking at an Architectural Digest magazine that was published. It was at a coffee shop near where I live. It is just so random, but it was like published in the late 60s or early 70s. And it was just beautifully designed. Like the typefaces, the layout, the spacing, like it was gorgeous. I was like, oh, this is like the best thing ever. So I think taking inspiration outside of your field always results in a more unique perspective. So it doesn't have to be like 1970s architecture magazines, but I think that there's so much, like our world is visual. We see with our eyes. So there's so many places that we can derive inspiration from that isn't just like looking at a CSS Awards website. Yeah. And I think the internet would probably be a better place or at least a more interesting place if people kind of got their inspiration from lots of different places instead of just the same tired ones.
And it's interesting. I'm just back from a conference for Ontraport. They had a thing called Ontrapalooza, a big marketing conference, and one of the things they launched at that was a magazine, a physical magazine, and it was beautiful. Nice. And it's just really it's lovely. And Ontraport as a brand, I know some of your clients will use Ontraport, and I'm a big fan of Ontraport as well. I like the culture of the business as well as what they actually do. And but I just loved the fact that they were going to magazine. And I think, even my background in the music industry, where obviously Spotify and it's completely changed things, but what's been coming back in quite a strong way and has really got a strong foothold now as well is just beautiful vinyl and almost like coffee table type products. So if people are going to get a physical thing, they want it to have something about it. It can't just be a CD in a horrible jewel case that you're gonna throw away. It has to have something about it. It has to relate to the artist that's creating it as well. So like I'm just thinking that's kind of amazing that we're kind of almost going that full circle in a way, and we're seeing like tech companies bring out print magazines.
Yeah, my favorite magazine is Offscreen, which is a magazine about web design that doesn't exist on the internet. Like the magazine, you can't download a PDF of it. It doesn't exist. You can only buy the physical magazine.
Wow.
And I think stuff like that is great. Like all the books that I have, I bought, one, because I wanted to read them, obviously, but two, because there's such a nice visual aesthetic to them. And it would be a shame to not have a physical copy. And those sit kind of beside my coffee table as well.
So you're going to be unusual. When I speak, we've had a lot of creatives on the show, and I say creative, I mean everyone's creative, but in terms of creative industries, I should maybe say in terms of design and things, and a lot of them don't like selling. And when I hear you speak about selling, you speak about it in a different way, and it sounds like you obviously enjoy selling. You enjoy that having those kind of conversations as well. So I think this is kind of important for people that are listening just now who maybe feel uncomfortable with this idea of like selling their art. What your mindset is when it comes to selling.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people and a lot of quote unquote creative people, because I agree everybody's a creative, but a lot of people who consider themselves creatives have a problem with selling because they think they have to sell in a specific way. And I would be uncomfortable if I had to sell, like for example, if I had to sell the way that Gary Vee sold. I'm pretty much the exact opposite personality type. And I love Gary Vee, but like I'm the exact opposite personality type of him. So it would be very difficult for me to sell in that way, and I'd feel uncomfortable and I would want to quit, and I probably would. So what I've found is that selling is really just connecting with specific people, and the people in my audience are people that I really like and that I enjoy talking to, that I enjoy connecting with. So selling to them is easy because I just have to talk to them. And the way that I sell is just basically an extension of my personality. So I'm a lot more comfortable with it because it's not just like this is the prescribed way that people think they should sell on the internet. One of the best in terms of, and best being defined as the email that generated the most money for my business. The best email that I ever sent had a picture of my pet rats at the very bottom instead of a buy now button. And to people who aren't in my audience, they're like, I don't even understand that. That doesn't make sense, Paul. I don't know how that could make any money. But for people in my audience, they know that rats are important to me, that my audience defines themselves as rat people, which is a whole other thing. And so in selling to them, I just really have to tell them stories. And that's pretty much what I do. I've been a musician and a writer forever. Like, I tell stories. That's what every creative tells, a story through their art, right? Yeah. So the way that I sell is just I tell a story. I tell a story that has a few key ingredients, but it's still a story. Like, I talk about the outcome, that if you buy this will happen. Obviously important for selling, but I tell it in my own voice, in my own way, with lots of non sequiturs and weird references, because that's who I am. And there's typically some offbeat humor, because that's who I am. But they don't read, and that's what a lot of people tell me. They're like, your sales emails, your sales pages don't read like sales. And then they buy those things. So they don't feel like they're being sold to, but they still like press the buy button and put in their credit card. And I think that it's easier to do it that way. And when I talk to people who say like, I have such a hard time selling, I question like, well, how are you selling? Because it's probably not that you have a problem selling in general. Like, every artist I know wishes that they could just do their art, right? Like if all they had to do was their art, they would be happy. And in order for them to do that, they need to sell that art, which is still fine. But the problem, I think, comes down to the perception that people have of selling itself. Instead of just like, oh, I don't like selling, it's that you don't like selling in a certain way that doesn't suit you or your brand or your audience. So if you can find a way to sell that makes sense to you, that sounds like you, because people don't buy unless they trust you. So if you're being honest, it's a lot easier to trust somebody who's honest, and that comes across as being honest. So I think that all of those things kind of make it easier for me, because I'm not just myself. Like, I write my sales emails the exact same as I write. Like, the last email that I wrote was talking about tattoos. Like, I write my sales emails the same as I would write about tattoos, or I'd write about like business and creativity. Like, it's just all me. And it sounds like me, this weird little guy who lives in the woods on an island who makes things on the internet. Like, that's just what comes across. And I think that resonates with people because it's just honest.
It's great when you're saying this, that sense of so many people seeing or having a conception of what selling is, especially when it comes to doing creative work, as the kind of apprentice type of thing, the hard sell. And I'm a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk as well, but when I watch his stuff and I think, God, it all sounds so hard. And like the hustle. And yeah. I was at an event recently, and there was a guy. I had actually seen him talk before, and I really liked his whole vibe on stage. Justin Livingstone, another Canadian who worked for many years with T. Harv Eker, and excellent, amazing. Now works with Callan Rush, who's a speaker as well. Amazing marketer. And he was interesting because he was talking about this whole thing of the hustle, with people like Gary Vee is made kind of well known and that kind of thing, and obviously it has a certain kind of way and it has a certain vibe, and it's like we would say here, like it's like Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. But what Justin was saying, which I think was a very good point, was he said that's not my thing. That's not how I believe an entrepreneurship is for me, and that's not how I sell. And he said, if I was here on stage just now with Gary Vee, Gary would probably tell me, because I think Gary would probably tell me, well, I'm going to beat you. and Justin's response was, we're not even playing the same game. We're not even in the same park. I'm playing a different game for you, so there's no one to beat. So it's just that kind of going into that mindset of, there's many different ways of selling, and you kind of speak to about this idea of it's about conversations, it's about trust, and it's those things. It's not that people just don't like people love to buy, they just don't like being sold to particularly.
Exactly. And I think that the point that you just made from Dustin, I think, is so valid, is that he's playing a different game. And I think that's one of the main things there too, is that you don't have to, what you make doesn't have to be marketable to everybody. So it doesn't have to be this watered down catering to the masses. Just like when I was talking to you about web design and the importance of niching down. With selling, I think, like if I'm going to write sales copy, I think about one person who's in my audience who would want to buy it, and then I just write it to them. And then I'm a lot more freer to add in my person. Like, 'cause I know that person knows me. I know that person wants to buy something from me. I know that person has a problem that the thing that I'm selling them will help solve. So it just becomes a lot easier. And like, I'm not trying to make all of the money on the internet or try to sell like all of the spots in my courses. Like, I don't care about that. I don't care about growing my company. I don't care about having a business. Like, if I had a business like Gary's, I would probably hate it because it would be a company that's made for somebody like Gary, not somebody like me. I hate to keep bringing up Gary because I like him as well.
If you're listening, just nothing against you, Gary. We love you, but it's just, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I think that's the point, that a lot of people think like, okay, if I'm selling, I got to make sure that like everybody wants this. And it's not the case. Like, I don't know how to sell to everybody.
Yeah.
Like I said at the very beginning of this, like I know how to sell to a very specific type of person who's already comfortable with the way that, like, I look at the sales video for my latest course has me in a tank top and you can see like all of my tattoos. I'm sitting in my kitchen. I'm just talking about MailChimp. Right. And like that doesn't like that. I'm sure that does not appeal to most people, but it appeals to enough of the people that I would like to take my course that it becomes viable for me to do that as a business.
Absolutely. So this journey you've had as a designer, as a writer, as a creator, can you tell us about a time where you worked on a creative project, you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason, it just didn't kind of work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took from that experience?
So much. There's so many things I've tried and I failed at. I'm really, really good at failing, but I'm just slightly better at trying new things. So then it balances out. But like, I don't know, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I did I tried to launch 2 software products with some people. And these were people who are like, one was like one of the head developers at Twitter. The other has like multi-million dollar company. Like, these are people who have won at a lot of things, and they just, I don't know, I guess I convinced them to work with me through magic or something. But like, we launched, and on 2 separate occasions with 2 separate groups of people, we tried to launch a software product. And the first one, we had 0 customers. Like, we couldn't even get one person to buy the product. And the second software thing that I built had 1 customer, and then they canceled after 2 months. And what I learned from that was that how important. Well, the first thing that I learned from that was how important like marketing and branding is. Like, you can't build something in secret and then tell everybody about it and then have them all flock to buy it right away. Like, that just doesn't work. And what I've kind of learned, and now that this is the first year that I've started doing software products again, it's been good to have a break because I've spent time learning by building my own like books and courses and that sort of thing. And what I've learned from all of that is that it really works if you kind of involve people in the process before you have something to sell them. Like, when I'm launching a course in January, I wouldn't start promoting in January. I'd start promoting it in probably October. And by promoting, I just mean talking about it. I mean, talking about what I'm working on, talk about kind of the steps that I'm taking to make this thing, talk about why I'm building it and for who am I building it for and what problems is it going to solve. And along the way, I would maybe talk about things like specifics in it, or give like a sample of one of the lessons in that course. And then by the time January rolls around, then the people who are paying attention, my audience, already know about this thing. I don't have to tell them everything about this thing. All I have to do is say like, hey, you know the thing that I've been talking to you about for the last like 4, 5, 6 months? It's ready. Do you want it? And that's it.
Yeah.
And in doing it this way, I have found that I can do like the things that I make have a lot better chance of success. And it's not 100%. Like, I launched a couple courses over the last 2 years where it's just kind of like they did pretty much nothing. But if I look at the success of some of my successful courses, they've done, like, my batting average, I guess, has increased exponentially because I just involve the people who are interested in the things that I do as early as possible. I ask them questions. I do interviews. Like, the book that I wrote that sold the most copies by, like, zeros added to it was a book that I wrote after I had dozens of calls with people in my audience and just talked to them. There was, like, no point in the conversation. I was just like, do you want to talk to me? Let's book a Skype call. And in doing all of those calls, I saw that there were some patterns and there's some things that people kept bringing up, like different people kept bringing up again and again. And then I used that, and then I started to write little bits of the book, and I shared it with my mailing list every week for months and months and months. And then when I released the book, everybody knew that it was coming. Everybody knew what it was about. And I had been talking to my audience about it, and that kind of gave me the idea to make it in the first place. So then when it was available, it was just like, it doesn't even, like, there's no sell. It's just, hey, this thing I was telling you about, here it is.
Here
Do you want it?
It's ready. It's ready. And
exactly.
And I love that as well. What you were saying there, having those conversations that whole time, you must have been very, very clued into the 2 a.m. problem. The person that's waking up at 2 a.m. like, oh, okay, I need to fix this thing. That real pain point, which sometimes I've actually been involved myself in launching courses, and some of the ones that haven't quite hit the mark. And I think back to them, I thought, they haven't really dealt with the 2 a.m. problem. No one is waking up at 2 a.m. saying, "Oh, I really need a course on this thing here," and it just and that was just through ego, frankly, which I think is a terrible thing for creativity, because it's like, especially if you've had a string of successes, and I had a number of courses that did really, really well, and then you kind of get that, unfortunately, the ego thing for me personally, it started coming in, and then you get your result that you maybe didn't quite anticipate. And
when you start to think you know better than your audience that you serve, there's never ends. I've been in the same position, and that's why the things that I've made more recently have failed. Same thing.
Yeah. So let's have a talk about, we're talking about kind of apps and things kind of earlier as well. Are there any online resources or tools or apps like Evernote, for example, that you love and you're always telling people to check out?
So philosophically, I dislike tools for the sake of tools. And I think that, like, if you give a good musician a crappy guitar, they're still going to be a good musician. But if you give a crappy musician a good guitar, they're not going to be a good musician. But tempered with my philosophical disdain of tools slightly, there's certain things that I use every day. And I kind of like to, because people ask me about my tools a lot, I like to use ones that, like, it wouldn't, like, if I use Infusionsoft and I said, oh, Infusionsoft is the best thing in the entire world, and it's like $2,000, like, most people wouldn't be able to use that. So I like to kind of use tools that are free or really cheap. One, because I'm cheap, but two, I feel like if I can figure them out and share that with others, then if they can actually afford to use it, then that's actually a good thing. So for me, like Google Docs, I use Google Docs for everything all the time. And like, I live in spreadsheets for that, for my content calendar. I live in that for collaborating with people. I have products that are just Google Docs that people can, like, make a copy of and put it onto their own drive. So I use that a lot. MailChimp, like, my business basically runs on MailChimp. And that's where I generate pretty much all of my revenue comes from my mailing list. And there's so many different email service providers, and most of them are good. Like, the reason I like MailChimp is because I know it and I use it, and yes, I have a course on it, but like, if people are like, oh, well, isn't Drip better or isn't ConvertKit better? It's like, sure. If you think they're better, then they're definitely better. It's just whatever you can use that works the best for your business and the way that you think through problems that are solved by that tool, that's the best tool for you. For me, email is the most important thing in my business, and the thing that I use for email is MailChimp. If it's something else for you, then awesome. Like, that's I'm totally cool with that.
And it's interesting, having researched a whole bunch of creatives from various different industries and things. It's interesting, as they get older and they get actually better at their craft and what they do, they very often reduce their tool set, the toolkit that they work with, and they work with fewer tools, but they're really, really good at those tools. And so and I suppose that's an issue sometimes with the bright shiny thing syndrome. They can sometimes, when someone's got a launch of some new really cool something, it's kind of easy to jump on that and then think, oh, it's going to be much better than that. And I love MailChimp. I always suggest it to, especially for a lot of musicians, because I think they have some of the nicest newsletters, and for folks that are just getting into to email as well. And I think even I can't remember if I saw someone recently. I think it was maybe Ramit Sethi mentioned something where he talked about the growth of his business over 5 years, and the article was basically saying you don't have to do all that stuff you're told you have to do. And I think it was basically for the first 2 years he just did emails. Like I think he had a MailChimp account and he just did emails, and he got really good at doing emails. He didn't have affiliate programs, didn't have a whole bunch of other stuff like fancy systems, automation and things. He just did his thing, and he got very, very good at copywriting and sending those out.
Exactly. Like a lot of us are just one person businesses, and there's no way that we could do all of the things. Like even for me, like I focus when I'm launching a course, and I launch courses typically multiple times. For every launch, I focus on one thing, and that's it. For the last iteration of my MailChimp course, Chimp Essentials, all I focused on was email automations. And the next time I launch it, I'm going to be focused on conversion copywriting and A/B tests. So even for somebody like this is my full-time job, basically, and I still only focus on one thing per launch. And then I just you can automate things later and you can add more things later, but it's better to launch sooner. And then because we can just, like we were talking about, like it's easy for us to let our egos make decisions, when in reality, it's a lot better for data to make decisions or for our paying customers to make decisions. And then we can start paying attention to, okay, well, what do I need to focus on based on the data that's in front of me, based on like analytics or based on a customer survey. Like I sent out a survey to my MailChimp course students, and I got like 500 replies, and I've just been going through the data for that, and that's going to lead me to what lessons I add to the course next, instead of me thinking like, I think people want to learn this, I'm going to make a lesson on this. It's like, no, I'm going to see what people actually want and then make that thing. Yeah. So launch it, but then to do that, like it's okay to leave gaps in the things that you like. I launched my first course with, I think, 5 lessons, and now it has 12 lessons. But if I had launched with 30 lessons, I probably couldn't have launched it for another like 6 months because it would have taken me that long to do the lessons. But I'd rather launch something small, pay attention to the information that I see after I launch it from students and from data, and then grow it, and then grow it again, and then grow it again, and then grow it again.
And iterate. Wonderful.
Yeah. If
you could only recommend then one record and one book to our listeners, and I know you're a big music guy as well, so what would that record and that book be?
Right now, it's The Great Detachment by Wintersleep. It's my favorite album to listen to. Like my favorite new album. I listen to some albums on repeat, but I think that came out this year. I think this is the only album I'm listening to that came out this year right now. But they're a great Canadian band.
And what would the book be?
And then the book would be Dark Matter, which I just read because I just got back from vacation. I read Dark Matter in like a day because I was just sitting at a pool, so all I was doing was reading. So it was a quick read for me. If I'd been at home, then it probably would have taken me 2 months. But yeah, Dark Matter, phenomenal kind of quantum physics thriller, which makes it sound heady, but it is a super, super easy read and really, really it's a page turner from the very first page.
Fantastic. Great recommendations. People just go to jamestaylor.me and just type in Paul Jarvis and you get links to all of this that we're talking about just now and all the resources. Final question for you, Paul. Let's imagine tomorrow morning you wake up and you have to start from scratch. So you have the tools of your trade that we were just talking about and the knowledge and the skills that you've acquired over the years doing what you do, but you have no contacts, no one knows who you are. You have to restart. How would you restart?
Drinking.
Once the excessive drinking stage has passed.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and this is something that I've been asked before, and I think that it's a good experiment. The first thing that I would do is try to find a single person to pay me for something that I know how to do, because that seems a lot less like if I start to think of, which I did, like when you asked that, I'm like, oh my goodness, how do I build back up to like 10,000 students and like hundreds of thousands of readers, and like my brain just wants to blow up. And it's like too heady, and like we get so far when we start to think like that, we get so far out of the present that our future scenarios kind of just destroy us. And that's why, like, maybe I'll start drinking. I don't even drink, but that's the first thing that came to my mind is I'm going to start drinking. But if you break it down into smaller, more accessible chunks, like, okay, how can I find one person to give me money for a thing that I know how to do? Like, that's something that I could spend the morning working on. I could send out maybe 10 cold emails, or I could look for a meetup in my local area where people are talking about something, or I could find somebody that I can help that with like a small task that might lead to something bigger. And I think that would be a lot better use of my time than like getting a bottle of Jack Daniels or something like that, is to just start small. Like, start with one. Like, people want to go from 0 to 100 right away. And I think that it's really different. Like, and unfortunately there are stories about this, how you can, like, I started a business and the next day I have like 100,000 like followers on Instagram that I've completely monetized. But that's not really, like, that's not the case very often. The case more often is that somebody's worked at something for a long time. They built up a good rapport with the people that they connect with, and they've built a business over time. Like, it's taken me 18 years to build my business to where it is. And I don't think that, like, most people are smarter than me. They could do it in less time, but it still is probably going to take like years and not days to get there. So I think focusing on small is always better, because you can wrap your head around that. Like, you can wrap your head around, like, okay, I'm just going to find one person to pay me $100 to do this thing. And then if you find like 20 people to do that, then maybe you can turn that into a course, because you've just helped 20 people who would probably give you really glowing testimonials that you could put on the sales page. But just jumping to the course, like, if I made a course, I don't know how I would sell it to the first 20 people, because I don't know who those 20 people are, right? So that's probably what I would do.
And you don't know those 2 a.m. problems that
Exactly.
those people they're having as well. Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure just kind of speaking to you for the first time today as well. What's the best way that listeners can connect with you, learn more about your courses, your books, and everything else you've got going on?
Yeah, the best thing is my mailing list. I send out a weekly email every Sunday. It's called the Sunday Dispatches. If you Google Paul Jarvis, you'll see the sign-up form. It's on every page on my website. But that's the best way. Like, I write an article and I share it with my list every Sunday, and I've never missed a Sunday other than the break that I take in November and December. And I talk about the things I'm launching. I talk about random things that my audience cares about. I talk about building a business as a creative, but that's really, like, that's the main thing. That's the best way to keep up with what I do.
Fantastic. Well, Paul, thanks so much for coming on the show. I wish you all the best. And now that you're getting back after your short break away, getting back into things, hopefully you're not going to turn to a bottle of Jack Daniels straight away. But I wish you about. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, James.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.